This tutorial will show you how to use the ladder method when doing metric conversions. When using the ladder method, you have to know your metric units. In a few slides, I'm going to show you a trick on how to remember those, and it will help for the rest of your high school, college career. Now, today we're going to start with kilo. Kilo is the largest you're going to use this year. There are larger units in the metric system, but kilo is where we'll start. Kilo, 1,000 units. Hecto, 100 units. Deca, 10 units. And then if you're starting to notice this pattern, good for you, because yes, it goes by tens. Here I've taken off a 0, now I'm at hecto, taking off a 0, I'm at deca, and if I took out a 0, what would I be at? 1, right. So we're at our basic unit. Now this is another great thing about the metric system. It doesn't matter if I'm converting meters, liters, or grams. We're always going to do the same method of conversion. Now the smaller end of the ladder method, deci, which is 0.1 units, or we call it a tenth of a unit. Centi, 0.01 units, or what we should be calling it, a hundredth of a unit. And milli, 0.001 units, or a thousandth. Now when using the ladder method, you have to do a few steps. First, very important, where are we starting at? What's our starting point? So I'm giving us a sample problem. I have 2 kilometers equals how many meters? So you have to ask yourself, where am I starting? You're starting at kilometers, or some people say kilometers, doesn't matter. The next thing you need to do is make jumps to the ending point. So I have to also ask myself, where's my ending point? My ending point is at the end. It's where I want to do the conversion to. So it's meters in this case. So you ask yourself, where am I starting? Kilometers. Ending meters. So start on your ladder at kilometers. And then we have 1 jump, 2, 3. Because it took us, how many jumps did it take us? 3. 3 jumps to go from kilo to meter. Now some kids will confuse the M for milli. Milli is a prefix, and we'll get into that later on, but a prefix goes in front. So for this to be millimeter, it has to be mm. So when I only see one M, I know that it's always talking about the meters. So we counted 3 jumps from kilo to meter. So now what do I do? Well, you're going to take that jumping method and you're going to use it on the decimal in 2 kilometers. But you go, wait a minute, Mrs. Sanborn, there's no decimal. No worries. Remember, the decimal always comes after the whole number. So put it in and move it over 1. Now if you notice, I moved it over 1 and I put a 0. That's because there was no numbers after the decimal in 2 kilometers. We're making this number bigger, so it means we have to include or put in a 0. So then I move it over again. Again, we have to add a 0. And moving over one more time, adding a 0. So I've jumped, just like I did here, 1, 2, 3. I jumped 3, and if you notice, I'm moving to the right. I jumped 3. If you notice, we're moving to the right. So our new answer is going to be 2,000 meters. So 2 kilometers is 2,000 meters because we jumped and moved that decimal over and included some zeros. Now you don't need to write that decimal. If you leave it off, it's fine. So you can write it this way as well, 2,000 meters. Okay, so now we're going to do another problem. So we're going to use a ladder method, but before we use a ladder method, we have to do a little review. So see if you can remember what goes in this box. Kilo, correct. Kilo is 1,000 units. Next, we have hecto, which is 100 units. And then deca, which is 10 units. And then we're at our basic unit, which is 1, which could be meters, liters, grams, doesn't matter, whatever you're using. And now we're going on the small side, deci, which is 0.1 unit of whatever we're using, or a tenth. Centi, 0.01 unit, or a hundredth. And then we have milli, which is 0.01 unit, or a thousandth of a unit. So ask yourself, what is the first thing I have to do? Good. You have to determine your starting point. So let's give you a problem. I have 6.3 kilometers, and I want to change that into meters. So how do I do that? Well, I have to ask myself the starting point, very important. Ask myself the ending point, again, very important. So now we're going to count the jumps from my starting point to my ending point. 1, 2, 3. So I have 3 jumps from my starting point, kilometers, to my ending point, meters. So again, ask yourself how many jumps. Also ask yourself, and I forgot this, what direction am I jumping? So I'm jumping to the right. We're going to move the decimal, the same number of jumps, in the same direction. So if you notice this problem, it's 6.3 kilometers. So this time we have a decimal already. So if you notice, I'm moving the decimal to the right of the 3. So now in the first jump, we've changed 6.3 to 63. Now I move again, but there was no whole number, so I inserted a 0. And again, inserting a 0. So if I had 6.3 kilometers, it would convert into 6,300 meters. Now you notice the decimals there, but once again, you can write it as 6,300 meters without the decimal. Okay, so now we're going to do a practice problem. So I filled in the letter already, and I'm going to give you this problem. 87 centimeters, convert it into meters. So ask yourself the starting point, centi, and you notice I put an arrow underneath the centi. Where's my ending point? Meters, and you notice I put an arrow at basic unit. Now don't confuse the M for milli. I can say this over and over and still you'll do it. Milli is a prefix, which means it doesn't stand alone. It always goes in front. So millimeters is mm, milliliters, ml, or milligrams, mg. So again, that m, just one, is always going to be our basic unit. So how many jumps did it take to go from centimeters to meters? So it took us 2. Pay attention also to what direction. We went this time left. So our number is going to get smaller when we go to the left. Our number will get bigger if we go to the right. So I'm going to write it 87, and I'm going to stick that decimal in because remember it comes always after the whole numbers. And I'm going to jump the same number and same direction as I did on the ladder. So I move that decimal over 2 spots to the left. So your answer would be 0.87 meters, or 87 hundredths of a meter. So it's not a whole meter right now, it's just part of a meter. Okay, so I told you I would teach you a little trick on how to remember the ladder method, even when you're not given a ladder method. So here's the saying that I created that I have my students remember. So Keene, our middle school, Keene Haven, So our middle school's name, Keene Haven, Keene represents kilo, the K in kilo. Haven represents the H in hecto. Does, if you're remembering this saying, does would represent deca. Understand, the U in understand would represent the basic unit, which we're just going to call it a unit, makes it easier. Doing, the D in doing is representing deci. Conversions, the C in conversions representing centi. And M in metric is going to represent milli. So if you say this to yourself, Keene Haven does understand doing conversions metric, you're going to remember the ladder method. And what I teach my kids to do is just write, as you're saying Keene Haven does, you just write Keene, K, Haven, H, does, D. And if you remember this saying, it's going to make it so easy. No matter what you're doing, even if it's doesn't have a ladder method, as long as you remember that saying, you'll be able to answer what units are in the metric system. Okay, so let's see how you do with the ladder method. So if I gave you Keene, what does it represent? Kilo. So you would write a K. Haven, try to think of it in your head. What does it represent? Hecto. So on your paper you would write an H. Does, what does it represent? The D in deca. So you'd write a D. So right now on your paper you would have a K, an H, and a D. Understand. Again, understand is our basic unit, but we're just going to call it a unit, U. Doing, what does it represent? Deci. Now I'll get into the difference between deca and deci later on. Deca is DA, the abbreviation. Deci is just the D. Conversion, you have the C, so what does it represent in the metric system? Centi. Good. And then the last one, conversions metric, what is the M for metric? Milli, so that M. So again, if you can remember, Keene Haven does understand doing conversions metric, you're going to remember kilo, hecta, deca, unit, deci, centi, milli. Easy. Okay, so let's review. So I'm going to give you a problem, 64 hectometers into how many meters? You don't have your ladder, so you're going to have to write it out. If you remember your saying, Keene Haven, sorry for the bad handwriting, does understand doing conversion metric. And so what I tell my students to do is to write down the 64, and because it doesn't have a decimal, remember we put it always at the end of the whole number. So you ask yourself, okay, so where am I going to start? I'm going to start at hecto, and I'm going to jump to basic unit. 1, 2, because I know meters is in basic unit. So I've jumped 2 to the right, which means I'm going to move my decimal 2 to the right. 1, 2. So now my decimal is here, not here. You have to make sure you take it with you. And because there is no numbers here, we have to insert zeros to hold their place value. So what I've come up with is now 64 hectometers. It doesn't show up very well. Let's try black. Is 6,400 meters, or 6,400 meters. All right, so let's try another problem. I have 2,497 centimeters, and I want you to convert it into kilometers. So we write our ladder method. Keene Haven does understand doing conversion metric. And like I said, we always want to make sure that we rewrite our problem so we have room to move the decimal and jump. So I always tell my students to write it below. So I'm going to write just the number 2,497. And so now I'm going to ask myself, where am I starting? I'm starting at centimeters, so I'm starting here at centimeters. Where am I ending? I'm going to end at kilometers. So I go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I jumped 5 to the left, which means putting in my decimal, I'm going to need to jump 5 to the left here. So I'm going to jump the same way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now my decimal is right here. Now everywhere I had a number except right here. So anytime you have an open space, we have to put in that 0 as a placeholder. So my answer for this problem would be 0, because I have no whole numbers, 0.2497. So I hope this tutorial has helped you. Again, if you need more help, come and talk to me anytime. That's what I'm here for. But I put this tutorial so you can watch it over and over a few times and do some practice.